Hello everyone, my name is Joe Sang. Welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to do a drawing demo on an eye. And as you can see, I started mapping it out just a little bit, just enough to give me a little indication of where next I'm going to go. So right now we have the folds in the upper eyelid, and we have established the tear ducts, the inside, and where it overlaps on the outside. And now we're going to establish, let's see, tear duct, and that's where the white of the eye is going to turn up into the upper eyelid. Right over here, it comes down a little bit more. And we're going to draw. It's going to just, the eyeball is going to just barely touch the lower eyelid. And just remember, we can always go back and make minor adjustments. This is the eyebrow right now. Having that eyebrow in there always helps. It always helps in that it gives you more landmarks. The more landmarks you have, the better idea of what you're looking at. Same thing when you're driving along the road. If you have landmarks, you know where you are. So, and here's just the indication where the bridge of the nose is going to be. Okay, so, all right, so we want to round out this eyeball a little bit more. I'm going to just make it a little bit darker for you. And right now we're going to, the pupil is going to be right around here. And some highlights. Alright, we're off to a good start here. And, alright, now we want to go back and articulate some of the areas where the folds are to make them. We want to work on the contours of the lines where the folds are a little bit deeper. We want to just add a little bit more pressure, maybe even accentuate the fold by making the line wider. Okay. And let's see, here we go. We're going to just add a little bit of shadow there. I'm going to heighten that bridge a little bit. And now we can add the shadow. And I'm just making lines in the same direction. Another name for that is called hatching. And these are just some terms that I learned in art school. Some terms that we use also in the industry. I was in the industry right after graduating college, art college, in tri-state area. Okay, now we're going to go back and, okay, so it's here. Okay. And we're going to just soften this curve up a little bit. It's going to come down. Okay, so we're going to do some hatching in this direction. But we want to make the hatching nice and soft, so it's all about pressure. You want to keep the pressure nice and soft. That way the gradient is a lot more natural. And it won't appear to be just random lines. Okay, so we're going to have some shading over here as well. All right. At this stage, we don't see much as far as depth yet, because we haven't established a lot of the areas where there's going to be contrast. Going back, and so working with just a graphite pencil, in order to get your depth and darkness, you're going to have to go over with multiple layers in order to get that darkness. In future upcoming tutorials, I'll show you how to overstep this little task of making so many layers using various pencil leads, H's being your hard pencils and B's being your very soft. You'll be able to, in one stroke, get a darker shade with the B's versus the H's. And we're going to add some shadows right here. And I just want to thank all the viewers that took the time out of their day to take a look at the tutorials, and I really appreciate all the constructive criticism that I received, and I am taking all of them to heart, and I appreciate you guys going out on a limb and doing that, because it's only going to help me produce better tutorials for you guys. So I welcome them with open arms. And right, so now we're going to go the upper eyelid. We're going to make that very dramatic. We're going to drop a little cast shadow. Very light, very subtle. When it comes to doing realistic things, you don't want anything too contrasty. When I say contrasted, I'm talking about shapes that look very graphic, very bold, harsh lines. When it comes to realistic things, everything is very subtle, nuances. And that is what I hope to demonstrate today. So. So now I'm trying to work on the contours. It comes down at this angle, but then there's a soft curve that goes up and then down. It's so subtle, I'm not sure if you viewers can even appreciate that. See that line right there? I made that too sharp. Somehow I'm going to go back and I'm going to have to go back and soften it somehow. But that'll come later. And I'm just adding some shadows over here. I'm trying to give the illusion that the eyeball is a sphere. Okay, let's work. So it has like mini hatches going all the way around the diameter of the eyeball. All right, let's give some a little bit of depth by differentiating what's what. We're just filling in the okay, let's go one more shade darker. You want to remember when shading, you don't want to go too dark too fast, because if you have to go back and erase, you're most likely going to make a mess of it. Smudges and whatnot. Remember, you can always go darker. Let's bring it out just a little bit more. I want to make sure that I don't fill in those areas which will inevitably be highlights. Okay, so we're going to go one more time around the track. And we're going to fill the rest in with lighter lines. And you want to make sure that they're all these lines are radiating from the center out towards the edge. Let's soften this up a little bit. I'm going to soften this up right here. Right, so So we have a little bit of definition on the upper lip. It has a sort of a convex shape. It's coming up and around. I want the same thing on this. But now because we did that, this area from the eyelid to the eyebrow looks very flat. In actuality, it's not. It's also convex. A very slight and minimal, but nonetheless. So we also want to give that a little bit of it's all about subtleties. And subtleties and balance. So it's all about relation. You don't want to work on one area too long because then you kind of lose yourself in that area and forget about the rest, and then it's going to look very odd. So now I'm just trying to create more of the shape of the eyebrow by just adding more hairs. And depending on the eyebrow, you have to pay attention to the direction of the hairs. The direction of the hairs gives the eyebrow whatever characteristic you're going for. If you make it very wild, it's going to look bushy and unkept. If that's what you're going for, that's fine. But if you're going something, if you're wanting an eyebrow that looks more manicured, then of course you're going to have to watch your edges and boundaries. You want to keep them soft at the same time. And you have to watch how they taper, because it's not all going to be the same darkness. I didn't like the angle that was, so it was too low for me. So I'm just adding. And underneath, the hairs underneath the eyebrows are going to be darker because the hairs on top and the brow are going to form a cast shadow on the individual hairs. And it's also going to give you that shelf-like effect that you're wanting to get. Okay. Now by darkening this area, the eyebrow, looking at the whole drawing in its totality, I realized that I need to go back and deepen this shadow. I might want to go back with cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is when your first layer of lines go in one direction, and then your second set of lines go in the opposite direction. So creating like tic-tac-toe marks, but not as pronounced. Okay. 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 And from the darkness in the eyebrow and the eyelid, the area in between looks very white. It looks very bright. And we want to dull that down a little bit, so we want to just add a little bit of just a very light grade to knock it down a bit. Over here it's fine. So we want the illusion that this area to be a little bit higher as far as the bone structure underneath, underlying infrastructure. Okay. See, right now I tried this shade and it looks a bit too separate and hairy because my strokes were not as subtle as they should be. And so I'm going back right now and trying to absolve that problem. Okay. So now we're working in the temple area. So from the upper eyelid to the brow, it's going to create a shadow. And then from the eyebrow up into the temple. Yeah, I cannot stress enough how, when doing realistic drawings, it's about taking everything in stride. Requires lots of patience. And the more you draw, the more that'll come along. And the easier things that you once thought were very difficult, then you find a pattern and you realize that they're not as hard because you'll be able to systematically break them down into shapes versus looking at the total piece, which at times can be very daunting and overwhelming. Right, so here we go. Now we're going to work on eyelashes. Okay. So for the eyelashes, we're going to have to build up value. So we want a certain area, just the area right underneath the upper eyelid, to be just a little bit darker. And once you have that accomplished, then you have to go back individually with the hairs. Individually, or if you see like clumps of eyebrows that are the same value, meaning same darkness, then you can do them together. Otherwise, you have to do them individually. All right, so at times it may not even look like anything's happening, but okay. So from the upper eyelid, the eyelash is going to come down and then back up, down and then back up. So it's going to make the upper eyelid underneath seem a little irregular because it's not going to be one smooth piece of flesh because the hairs are going to blur that smoothness. Okay, now coming towards the inner eye duct, they're going to start coming out towards the viewer, towards you guys. And maybe even forming clumps, whether the person is wearing makeup or not, that's a major factor. Okay, so we just want to bring everything together with a homogenize certain areas. Okay, so we want the highlights to be remember what I told you earlier about erasing? Here's a prime example. But we'll work that out a little bit later. And from the iris, it's a different color from the rest of the eyeball, so we need to enhance that a bit. Of course, that's going to accentuate okay. Establish a little bit more cast shadow from the upper eyelid. And some folds. Very subtle. You don't want to age her too much. So that's another thing that people often do when drawing facial features. Too many dark lines. When you have too many dark lines, you automatically age the person probably like 10 years or so. So if at all possible, you want to try not to do that. Get into the practice of not aging people, especially when you're doing portraits. Okay, so we're doing the bottom. So eyelashes, here we go. And we want them coming towards you. And some of them are going to crisscross. The eyelashes on the bottom are generally a bit shorter. And okay, let's see. What if we put a little bit more shadow here? Just to lengthen the eye. Alright, let's very lightly just scratch the surface and very lightly. Sorry guys, it was an awkward position. So I had to turn the paper, if you guys don't mind.